this section, although we don't spend a lot of time in this particular 101 skills course, deep diving into the standard, it is important to take a little bit of time for a dive into the terms and definitions that have been set up by the 19,011 standard, because this is the guidance document, again, that we saw in the previous slides that gives guidance to auditing management systems. So some of the terms and definitions we have here really help us in interpreting, how do you, they set the stage for how do you put a good audit program together, good competencies for your audits, auditors, et cetera. So the first one is audit, and it's a systematic, independent, and documented process. The key here is that it's a documented process, and it's, independent and systematic. And this is something where you're gathering objective evidence and comparing that evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent to which the audit criteria are fulfilled. Okay. So you also notice within these definitions that whenever there's another term that's within the definition here, you'll see that annotated here. So it's a good thing to help navigate how these terms are connected. Number two, combined audit criteria. So this is a fairly new term, and the idea here is this is an audit that's carried out together at a single auditee on two or more management systems. So I'll go out and do some auditing for a certification body as a contractor, and sometimes there will be, let's say, an aerospace auditor, and then a 9001 auditor, or an environmental auditor, and a quality or health and safety auditor. It's all being done at the same time, and that's what a combined audit criteria is. Joint audit, similar, but it's an audit that's carried out at a single auditee by two or more auditing organizations. So it may not be the same audit team. It might be actually two different firms at the same time. Audit program, this is arrangements for a set of one or more audits planned for a specific time frame and directed towards a specific purpose. So it's really your auditing program is, let's say your audits that are planned for the entire year or 2 or 3 year period. That's the idea behind audit program. Then audit scope. This is the extent and the boundaries. Really, I look at that as the fence around a scheduled audit. So the scope helps to make sure that we're staying on track during the audit and not going out of bounds, basically. 3.6 audit plan. This is a description of the activities and arrangements for a specific audit. So this is where I see some confusion a little bit in an audit plan versus schedule. So an audit schedule or an audit program schedule might be, here are the audits that we're planning to do for the year. In January, we're going to hit these 3 areas of the business, and February, we're going to hit these other areas of the business, and there's some rationale there. That's more of an audit program schedule or annual plan or annual schedule. The audit plan itself would be specifically for a specific audit event. So you're going to go audit purchasing in 2 or 3 weeks. That's your audit plan. You're describing what are the activities and the arrangements and the timeline and who you're going to talk to and that sort of thing. And you want to make sure you get that really nice and snug and secure and clear up front. That'll save you a lot of time if you do that. 3.7 audit criteria. So this is a set of requirements that's used as a reference against which audit objective is compared. So if there is a requirement that says you need to remove your shoes upon entering the building, and that comes from policy 123, audit criteria is a set of those sets of requirements, a criteria in which you're evaluating actual performance against. Objective evidence. So this is data that's supporting the existence or verity of something. So objective evidence meaning here is something that is really hard to dispute, that helps me in determining if something is compliant or not, and the degree in which something is compliant or not. Audit evidence. This is record statements of fact or other information which are relevant to the audit criteria and verifiable. So it doesn't say audit evidence is documented or is documents. There might be, it's a statement of fact or other information. As long as it's verifiable, and then that becomes evidence. And sometimes that means that you'll have to talk to someone, let's say 3 or 4 different people to get the same answer, and your evidence then becomes, if you can verify and go back and ask those 4 people the question again later, and yes, this is what they stated, it's verifiable. All that to say, it doesn't necessarily have to be information that is written. Okay. So just keep that in mind. 3.10 audit findings. These are results of the evaluation of the collected audit evidence against the audit criteria. So your finding is your evaluation. Findings is, I look at that as a basket of all of these bits of evidence that you've pulled together while doing an audit. And you haven't quite made a conclusion on those pieces yet, but you've gathered that evidence objectively, and those collectively as a bundle become audit findings. Audit conclusion. Now, this does take you to the next level, which is the outcome of an audit after consideration of the objectives and the findings. Audit client. This is the organization or person requesting an audit. Typically, it's a person requesting an audit. A company isn't gonna, an entity doesn't have a phone or an email that they can use. So it's usually, I look at this as an audit client person. That seems to make a little bit more sense, because the next term is kind of really close as auditee. I look at audit client person, auditee organization as a whole, or parts thereof that's being audited. And an audit team could be a team of 1, okay? But it's 1 or more persons conducting an audit, supported if needed by technical experts. So your audit team doesn't have to be 100% fully compliant in all aspects of the business, and it doesn't have to be 20 auditors. It could be 1. Ideally, you have more than 1 if you have the bandwidth as an organization to support that. But the idea, it's 1 or more people that are out, persons conducting an audit, looking at the criteria, looking at the evidence. An auditor is the person who conducts the audit. A technical expert is it says audit person. So is a person who provides specific knowledge or expertise to the audit team. Now, I think that audits would improve, the results of audits would improve if more technical experts were used. So, for example, again, if you're auditing a laboratory or a chemical process that really requires in-depth chemical knowledge, chemistry, composition, and a lot of stuff that I don't understand, it's best if I lean on somebody that can help me in being fair, impartial, objective, that has the knowledge to actually get down into the weeds with respect to chemistry, so that they can help me in asking and prompting the correct questions. Observer. So this is something that it wasn't listed as a term before this change in 2018, but an observer is an individual who accompanies the audit team but does not act as an auditor. This is typically a host, or somebody that is walking you around. Maybe if you're doing 14,001 audit, it's the environmental leader for the business or something like that, that's really your host, and making sure you're getting from one area to the next safely, and really kind of just, as it says, observing the audit. Sometimes the observer steps out of bounds and really jumps in too often and answers the question. So I've had a few audits where I've had to press time out and say, hey, the observer is actually interrupting me during my audit, I know that the observer knows all of the policies and procedures, but I want to see if the individual workers or others that are involved in this process truly understand their role, so on and so forth. So management system, this is a set of interrelated and interacting elements of an organization to establish policies and objectives and processes to achieve those objectives. So really, it's if you look at processes as your fingers, the management system is your hands together. So it's the interrelated, and typically an output of one process becomes an input to one or more other processes. So it's really that web of processes and how they interact with one another that makes up a management system. 3.19 is risk. Risk is the effect of uncertainty. So we've seen that risk has popped up in the latest version of the standards where preventive action and that sort of thing was used in the past. But risk is really the intent is hopefully for better understanding is looking at opportunities to highlight risk so that you can get ahead of that and mitigate the risk where it makes sense to do so. Conformity, fulfillment of a requirement. The other side of that is non-fulfillment of a requirement, which is a non-conformity. Competence, this is the ability to apply knowledge and skills to achieve intended results. So for example, competency as it relates to auditing, which specifically in the automotive sector is really been a big add-on to the latest automotive QMS standard, which is ITF 16949, auditor competency. So what are the knowledge and skills that are needed for an auditor to achieve intended results? Well, that comes down to finding and presenting evidence on the condition of a process, the condition of an area of the business, and those findings actually meaning something. Those findings being a really good jump-off point for improvement. 3.23, requirement. This is a need or expectation that's stated, generally implied, or obligatory. So it doesn't have to be a stated requirement. It could be a generally implied. This is something that the consumer thinks is a requirement. This could be a statutory obligation. 3.24, process. This is a set of interrelated or interacting activities that uses inputs to drive an intended result. So I've also seen this defined as converting inputs into outputs. But the idea is there's some sort of activity that then takes inputs, let's say paper, ink, power, an inkjet copy machine, and then converts that into an intended result, which would be student manuals for a course like this if a class like this needed paper copies of the presentation, that sort of thing. So that's the process. It's that conversion from inputs into outputs. Performance would be measurable results. Effectiveness is the extent to which planned activities are realized and planned results are achieved. So it's one thing to go through the motions and follow a procedure or follow an instruction or work document, checklist, whatever, but have the planned results been achieved? Have you achieved that desired result? If so, then that work activity was effective. If not, there's a degree of ineffective work there. So the other piece here is so that you can see the bibliography, which is the source of each of these terms. The other thing that's worth looking at, let me see if I can pull it up here, is nope, I don't have that readily available. But if you go on to, I'll put a link in the course description, in the details here, but there's an electronic dictionary type deal that these terms have been pulled from, and that's an aggregate of these terms that I've provided for you that come from these four sources. All right. Although you may not be in the automotive sector, you may not be making products for the automotive supply chain, the automotive industry. It is worthwhile to look at the automotive process approach as it's defined. And to find out more about this, you can Google the automotive process approach. There's a couple of articles that I've been involved with, that I've contributed to or been the author of, blogs, other white papers on this approach. And the reason why I like to talk about the automotive process approach is because to me, it provides a really good methodology for auditing, irrespective of what industry you're auditing in. So number one is you want to question the auditees, the client's processes, the sequence and interaction, and really the performance against measures. So what is the performance against what their planned metric is? And you want to focus on those processes that are specifically close to the customer. They directly impact the customer. So the closer to the customer, the more risk there is for the customer to feel the negative effects if you don't hit a certain metric. Now, number two or B is questioning the process objectives and target with a focus on where targets are not being met. So if we go back to a few slides, you can see there are these illustrations here where we talked about a little too far. So here, so the idea on the automotive process approaches, and really the answer to this question that's posed here in the exercise is, where do you look? You look at the reds, you look at the yellows. You want to pay particular attention to where the auditee or the audit client, be it in-house or auditing, a supplier or whatever, you want to pay particular attention to the metrics that are not being met. Those things that seem to be off a bit. It's kind of like going to a doctor's appointment. If you have some vitals like blood pressure and glucose and temperature and height and weight, and looking at some of those key objectives and targets, if there's something that's really changed that is off target, that is an early indicator that something is wrong, and so that prompts the healthcare professional to dial in and pay particular attention, and spending his or her time wisely to investigate an isolated area of your health, rather than just randomly picking something on your body to evaluate. Questioning what plans are in place to ensure targets are met, and corrective action plans when objectives are not being met. Look, you're not going to be 100% hitting the mark every single time. It's just not going to happen. Objectives are in place. A lot of times you have strive goals, and the idea is that's fine if you're underperforming in a certain area, but what is your plan to get back on track? So those are some areas that the automotive process approach encourages you to pay particular interest, pay particular attention to. D, follow audit trails to linkages between customer concerns, performance against objectives, relevant process documents. So if something is broken and your targets aren't being met, let's follow that audit trail and see, is there, if somebody is skipping an inspection step, is there a linkage there between the process documentation not being right, or is there a linkage there between the customer complaints that have been increasing over the past few weeks or months? So that becomes one of those things to consider using the automotive process approach. Another thing is you want to make sure you're asking questions relative to customer specific requirements. So what additional special requirements is the customer asking for, or multiple customers asking for, that are above and beyond kind of the canned product or service that you give to them? Another thing, and I mentioned this earlier, is read more in our automotive process approach blog. Just Google automotive process approach, it'll probably come up.